This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Even if we're not socially disconnected or isolated, or we don't currently feel lonely, we can certainly relate to those feelings or circumstances. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, approximately half of U.S. adults reported experiencing loneliness. The issue moved U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy to issue an advisory around the loneliness epidemic in America. Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy announced a bill to launch an Office of Social Connection Policy and fund CDC research to better understand the epidemic of social isolation and loneliness. Here he is on the Colin McEnroe Show in July, just after announcing the legislation.
I think it's been part of a broader exploration for me of what is eating at America. I think as I get further along in my public service, I'm not interested only in just adjusting the dials of public policy, but trying to understand what is actually making people unhappy, because I think that my job in the end is supposed to be pursuing policies that end up making people more satisfied with their lives. And I have come to the conclusion that there's a lot of new and unique things that are hurting Americans and making them feel unhappy today.
With all this federal movement on the loneliness epidemic, what efforts are there locally? Joining us now to talk about that is Deb Bibbins. She's a founder and CEO for All Ages, a Connecticut collaborative to end loneliness. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Deb.
Thanks so much for having me on, Catherine.
And we also have Gary Sekorski, who is the co-founder and chair for All Ages, Connecticut collaborative to end loneliness. Thank you so much, Gary, for being with us this morning.
Of course. Thank you, Catherine. Glad to be here.
And for our listeners, you can also join the conversation and let us know if you're experiencing loneliness or what do you think is causing this epidemic. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Gary, I want to start with you. Can you tell us, how did you and Deb get connected, and what inspired For All Ages?
Well, it started in 2019. Just so everybody knows, Deb and I are longtime friends. Unfortunately, we both had very personal experiences with loved ones, people close to our immediate family, that was experiencing things directly connected to loneliness. And this prompted a lot of health issues, sadness, not connected, and actual physical and mental health problems. So Deb and I got together and we felt as though we really needed to do something about it. And Deb and I have been leading the charge ever since.
And Deb, can you talk about when did the collaborative come together and what kinds of organizations are involved with you all?
Sure. So just to take a quick step back, Gary and I founded For All Ages back in 2019. And that organization is all about connecting the generations to reduce loneliness and to reduce ageism. And so since 2019, we have been hosting and facilitating programs that bring people together across the generations. While we have been doing that over the past 4.5 years, we heard from lots of people, both older, younger, in between, from clinicians, from folks in the public health sector, talking about how many people that they knew were lonely or socially disconnected. And we realized that the problem was bigger than we even had anticipated when we launched For All Ages. And that is when we started really thinking about how can we do something to impact Connecticut's residents in a real positive way, bigger than For All Ages intergenerational programs. And so we put our heads together with a bunch of really smart people and designed the Connecticut Collaborative to End Loneliness. We had been in touch with Senator Murphy and with others about this work and launched it this summer following our Surgeon General's historic advisory, as you mentioned earlier. And so at this point, I'm really pleased to say that we have formed a steering committee. We have brought now a number of people on, senior leaders from various organizations across the state. And we have also been focusing on our first work stream that we're going to launch, which is focused on patient loneliness. And so very specifically focused there, we've brought folks from the Connecticut Department of Public Health, We have brought health insurer representatives, and we have brought clinicians, folks that see patients day in and day out, both younger and older, and everything in between, everyone in between, all ages, to really think about how can we do something where someone comes into an office and they talk about being socially disconnected, and finding ways to identify and then provide solutions. I think that's the biggest piece. And that's going to take a little bit of work from all of us working together across the state to identify solutions and places where people can go to improve their social connectedness.
When I think the fact that we're having this conversation today, and I know it's ongoing for many people, it's such a big deal because I can't imagine talking about this, say, a decade ago or maybe even 5 years ago. And the fact that we have an alert from Dr. Vivek Murthy about this epidemic addressing both isolation or social disconnectedness and loneliness. Deb, can you help us distinguish these issues? How are they different from each other?
Sure. I really think that a lot of people do get, they confuse both of them. So thank you for asking that. Social isolation is really an objective term. And so you can identify and you can visually see whether people are isolated, meaning they are on their own, or whether they are surrounded by other people. And so that is social isolation. It's very objective. The much more difficult component is loneliness. And loneliness is a feeling that one has that they don't belong. So they can be around a group of people. They can be at a party or at a social gathering and still feel lonely because they don't feel a sense of belonging and a sense of connection with those that are around them. And so if you were to draw a Venn diagram with, the two ovals, if you will, there would be an intersection in the middle. So one oval could be social isolation, the other would be loneliness. There is an intersection. Social isolation can cause loneliness, and the reverse is also true. Loneliness can cause one to become socially isolated.
And we're here to talk about this issue, which impacts all ages, like you mentioned earlier. And I think for a lot of people, we tend to think of the elderly population first when we're thinking about loneliness, just because retirement or you're ending a job and whatnot. But another maybe surprising fact about this epidemic, it's actually young people are more likely to feel loneliness. Can you talk about that, Deb?
Sure. We've seen some research from a variety of places, Cigna being one, where they found that nearly 80% of young adults age 18 to 24 are feeling lonely on a regular basis. And they've identified that young adult population as the loneliest. Brigham Young University also has been doing some research in this area and focused on youth and young adults. And they have found that those populations are experiencing much higher rates of loneliness than other generations.
And can we talk about how did the pandemic sort of compound these issues? I think we know that this is something that had pre-existed, but of course with the pandemic, it has exacerbated a lot of issues, including what we're talking about today.
Yes. So loneliness has been a problem for decades. It has gotten worse over the past, say, 50 to 70 years. Prior to the pandemic, approximately 60% of Americans of all ages were feeling lonely. During the pandemic, understandably, the social isolation that we all had to endure exacerbated the problem. And the research shows that during the pandemic, approximately 85% of Americans were feeling lonely. So that number has now come back down to around 60%, but it is still at an epidemic level. The pandemic, I think one of the only positives that I can think about that came out of the pandemic is that more people are talking about this issue that we're talking about this morning. And that's a really good thing. This is a problem that we all face, and that we can help each other come out of. Social health is the foundation of our mental and physical health. And I would say a decade ago, people were not talking about it in that way. I think we all understand it, but couldn't I think, have the words to frame it out and to understand it. And so we now know, as social beings, social connectedness is important to all of us. And it is, as I mentioned, the foundation of both our mental and our physical health. When we are not socially connected and when we are feeling lonely, we're more likely to feel anxious. We're more likely to feel depressed. We're more likely to, as older adults, have heart disease or potentially have a stroke. One of the most significant findings that Gary and I talk about an awful lot when we're out talking to people is that older adults who are lonely have a 50% higher probability of developing dementia. And so if we can take a step back and just absorb that for a moment, we can help older adults reduce the probability of developing dementia simply by ensuring that they stay socially connected. And if they're not socially connected, helping them find those opportunities to do so.
Well, Deb, I'm nodding my head. You can't see it, but I'm nodding my head. That I agree that it's just something that I think people are a lot more comfortable with talking about, especially if we're talking about it, live on air. Hopefully, people will find it to be more comfortable to talk about it personally, just like you and Gary, who you're able to sort of create this whole sort of movement because of this. And we'll get into this more a little bit later on. But I also want to talk about the stigma around talking about these issues. Is there a stigma, and how do you address that?
There definitely is a stigma. There historically has been shame associated with loneliness, which is really unfortunate. And what Gary and I share with folks as we're out talking to various groups throughout the state, we want people to think about loneliness the same way they think about hunger. So when you're hungry, it means that you need food. And when you're lonely, it simply means that you need social connection. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you should feel shame. It simply means that you need to go out and get socially connected and find those opportunities, whether they be with volunteering with a local nonprofit or joining some type of club around a hobby that they enjoy.
Well, Deb Gibbons and Gary Sekorski will be staying with us to help us find our social food. They're co-founders of For All Ages and the Connecticut Collaborative to End Loneliness. And listeners, you can weigh in on the issue of social disconnection as well, or how it affects you. Leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. This hour, we're discussing the complex and interwoven issues of social disconnection, isolation, and loneliness, and how this epidemic is being addressed around where we live. And joining us now to discuss her experience participating in a For All Ages friendship program is Connie Malone, who is a Canton resident. Thank you so much, Connie, for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Kat. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk about this issue personally and a lot of information that I've obtained.
Well, we're very excited for your excitement, and still with us on the line is Deb Gibbons and Gary Sekorski, who are co-founders of For All Ages and the Connecticut Collaborative to End Loneliness. And so, Connie, you recently participated in the Tea at 3 program. Can you tell us what your experience with that was like?
My experience was and will continue to be phenomenal. It was a godsend to be able to participate in this program, and I want to personally thank Deb and Gary for all the work that they do in hopefully combating this epidemic. I was fortunate to be connected at different seasons, the fall season, the spring, with 3 lovely ladies. And I am participating again in the fall season, and I'm very excited about that. It gave me something to wake up to, because I knew that we were going to have a conversation at some point, one of these ladies. The commonalities, the way that the organization matched us up was just like incredible. I would sometimes that phone call from this young lady was the only phone call that I would have that day. I mean, I've experienced loneliness, and to have a young person on the line that voluntarily wants to talk to me, that wants to listen to me, was just, it was incredible. And we talked mainly about each other's experiences and commonalities. What we had in common is cats and plants and etc. I mean, we would even send pictures back and forth to our about our cats playing or our plants growing, and I just loved every minute of it.
Well, cats and plants sounds like the perfect combination to me too, Connie. I think that's really wonderful. And so you mentioned, young people willing to call you and to have that phone call. Can you touch on the power of intergenerational relationships and what makes this interaction so special for you?
I sure can, because of course I'm retired and I don't go many places or listen to the news too much. But when I was privileged to talk to these young ladies in college and giving me their perspective on world issues, community issues, was just so helpful, giving me that younger perspective versus mine. And we talked about abortion, gun rights, politics in such a compassionate, friendly way. No judgment, no criticism. It was very open conversations about the issues that we face today.
And speaking of open conversations, I'm going to take a quick call from Valentina right now, who is in Farmington. Valentina, you're on the air.
Hi there. I just wanted to say that as a parent, social connection is something I've been focusing on a lot more because I feel like it's at the root of so many of the mental health struggles that a lot of youth and even adults experience today. And not just not being connected to others in our community, but really not being connected to ourselves either. And if you aren't connected to yourself, it's hard to connect with others. Connection and building and cultivating it is also, it's a skill that we develop. It's a social skill. It's so necessary for our community to be successful and for us to be successful individually. But I feel like we focus so much on making money and getting grades that we leave out all of the soft skills that are so necessary for feeling fulfillment and satisfaction, not just in your own life, but as a community and creating that together.
Well, thank you so much, Valentina, for sharing your thoughts. And I think community is certainly a theme for today, and sort of learning about connection and how education is, beyond the classroom. So thank you so much, Valentina, for that. And Connie, you were listening to Valentina. We'd love to get your thoughts about her raising the issue of loneliness and isolation in sort of a big picture.
Well, it is rampant. It's much more than most people realize. I experience loneliness, but to spread out into the community, I volunteer with the elderly, all ages, but mostly elderly, at community Cherrybrook Healthcare Center right here in Canton. And it breaks my heart, the people that are crying out for just a human touch, just a human interaction, as far as maybe reading to them or just being there, just being and listening. There are so many people there that don't have family, they don't have anyone, and they are truly, totally alone. And I'm trying to ramp up some more volunteers to address that need, which is just, it's throughout the community and Cherrybrook. And my own complex where I live, spouses are dying, mostly the men, and the women are left alone. And they don't know, they're too proud to ask for help, or they don't know who to ask for help. But there are lonely people living right here as my neighbors. And I have a lot of resources to help them, but to get the resources in their hands and then to get someone to help them put these resources into play, that's what's difficult. Most of them they can't afford a car, or they don't have a car, and it's difficult.
And Connie, as you continue to ramp this up, as you say, and have these conversations, with your friends and your peers and the young people as well, what sort of needs do you think this program meets in your community?
The community where I reside needs transportation to get to these resources. There are depressed people here that just they don't know what to do, and I can see and I can hear that some of them are just losing hope. They're just hungry for some type of faith-based interaction, because some of them are so, that's their hope, is in that their faith. So there's they need technical assistance, as far as even with a cell phone. That's a way of connection, and some of them don't have one or absolutely don't know how to use it. And I saw that firsthand yesterday, as a matter of fact. So there are a lot of needs, which I can elaborate on, but I'll just stop here for a moment.
Well, as you collect your thoughts, Deb, I would actually like to bring you back in and see what you have to say about what Connie is saying here, big picture, especially, about transportation and technical assistance. Those are all things that are needed for access to those programs. So, Deb, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you for that question. When Gary and I formulate and design programs, we're always thinking about what are the barriers to people attending? And certainly transportation is a big one. We in the state, I think, need to do a better job of figuring this out. As we all continue to age, we're going to have a greater need going forward. And I don't think we have figured it out yet. One of the things that's really important to us is that we host in-person programs and events and this virtual Tea at 3 community. And the whole idea behind the Tea at 3 community is that we're able to bring people together. And as long as they have a telephone, that's really all they need, is a phone. Then they're able to have some sort of social connection. As Connie was saying, a weekly phone call over the course of 12 weeks, where you get to grow an intergenerational friendship. We're connecting young adult college students with older adults. And we have people from all over the state participating in this program. We have people from young adults from 6 different universities this fall participating in this program. And the magic is that we don't have to worry about the transportation issue. We don't have to worry about the technology issue, as long as someone has a telephone and they are able to participate. But I think it's a balancing act going forward. The transportation issue is a big one. And I know that there's many local programs that are around that help people locally, and those are all fantastic. They need to be expanded. And as far as the technology, I know that there's more libraries that are popping up around the state that have these programs where young adults are teaching older adults about technology. And I'm all for those. I think they are absolutely needed, and I think they're a blessing to people.
Well, and with technology, joining us now through Zoom to discuss the power of intergenerational programs is Siri Palreddy, who's a senior at Amherst College in Massachusetts, who brought the Tea at 3 program to her campus. Thank you so much, Siri, for being with us this morning.
Yeah, good morning. So glad to be here.
So, Siri, you started college in 2020. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with Tea at 3?
Yeah, for sure. So when I entered my freshman year at Amherst, it was the summer of 2020. The pandemic had been going on since March then. And I sort of found out about Tea at 3 and 4 all ages through a local newsletter, reached out to Deb and Gary and found out about Tea at 3 and asked them if, they needed any help sort of expanding it to colleges like Amherst, which was in Massachusetts. And I will say, coming into college during the pandemic was a very unique experience. especially as a first year, you're sort of dealing with the newness of college and everything. And I was very lucky to be able to study in person at college, but there were necessary safety measures that sort of isolated me and other students from the rest of the community. So it was very lovely to have a program like For All Ages where I had this person, that I knew I could have a consistent conversation with every week.
And Siri, how would you say the issues of loneliness and isolation have been both exacerbated and spotlit during the pandemic as issues we can certainly all relate to?
For sure. Yeah, I know. I think Deb sort of mentioned that statistic that young people are often affected by loneliness. But I think with the pandemic, a lot of us who might not have felt lonely before definitely did in this unique way. The pandemic brought a sense of isolation upon us. So I think for the first time, myself and a lot of my peers were experiencing loneliness in a way we might not have encountered before. And I think, slowly that is changing. The pandemic has sort of not quite gone away, but it's definitely, in a much better state than before. We're able to have these in-person interactions. But during that time, 2020, where there was so much uncertainty in the air, honestly, about like, is school going to still come back, or just like the state of the world in general, it was nice to have that virtual connection that was, obviously physically safe with the COVID requirements and still allowed that sense of connection with someone who wasn't within my college bubble as well. Like I couldn't go back home during that time because of COVID safety. So it was nice to have someone from back home, from Connecticut, that I could talk to.
Well, what I love about this is it's a two-way street, right? You're benefiting from it. Your Connie is benefiting from it. It seems like there's a really bright spot here because this is such a widespread issue. But something that we can relate to is feeling lonely or being isolated. This feels like it's very much a part of our shared humanity. Is that something that you see, Siri?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think loneliness is inevitably part of the human condition. It's an unfortunate part, but I think it is something someone will experience at some point in their life. And I think that's like why programs like this are so great, because they are community-based. And you really just have to rely on other people to get you through those tough moments. And when you're connected to other people that you might not have had the chance to meet without programs like this, it's nice to get to know someone that might be out of your usual social circle. I mean, I never would have met or talked to the person I was paired up with had it not been For All Ages, because a lot of my community here is, younger peers, my professors, and they are all great people. But it's nice to get that sort of community from someone who is also experiencing loneliness in a very different way with their different life circumstances and the experiences they've had. So I definitely learned a lot from my partner, and also tried to impart some of my own knowledge or experiences. And I think we definitely enjoyed each other's company.
Well, we definitely appreciate you sharing your experience and knowledge with us. And it's so fascinating because I think while we were very isolated in some way during the pandemic, I feel like a lot of people also found connection through the disconnection, if you will. So Siri, you've been having these phone calls. Is a phone call really something that can do wonders?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think wonders is anything that even a phone call will do. I think it's a lot of continuous support that will eventually help with this problem. I mean, I think loneliness is very pervasive. I don't think it's something that this nation or maybe even this world will ever eradicate at any point in time. But I think the numerous programs that this organization has done and that other community-based organizations are doing, whether it's a phone call, whether now it's moving to more in-person community, I think it is slowly chipping away at that problem. I think it's all about providing more accessible and equitable resources for loneliness that will really be the key to addressing this, what, like you mentioned, Dr. Murthy calls an epidemic that we're experiencing right now.
And I got one more question for Deb. But before we go there, Connie, I would love to ask for your final thoughts here, your response to what Siri has to say.
I wanted to add one thing. Yes, thank you. One thing about the T43 phone calls. The ladies and I really developed a bond, whereas we spoke infrequently after the T43 session ended. And one lady who lives across the state actually asked me to her college graduation, which was, I mean, I was so grateful. I wasn't able to go, but that's how close that the younger ladies and myself, had grown. And I just I'm so grateful for that, because I don't talk to anybody. I talk to my cats. And when that phone call came, my heart just lifted. I was just very glad. And loneliness is an epidemic. It's a major problem. My fear is growing old alone. I mean, I've heard that elsewhere, and that's my big fear.
Well, thank you so much, Connie, for sharing that with us. I think our hearts just sort of collectively lifted with you there. And Deb, really quickly, how are Connie's and Siri's experiences sort of emblematic of this program? And can you talk a little bit about the importance of intergenerational friendships?
Sure. So, it makes my heart really happy to hear Connie and Siri talk about how the Tea at 3 community, which is our virtual community, has helped them very personally, and I want to thank them both for being willing to share that with everyone this morning. We have had hundreds of people go through this program. It's a 12-week program, and we've had many people, as Connie alluded to, continue to stay connected after after the program is over, which is wonderful. I think that intergenerational programs, the magic of intergenerational programs is that we're able to help two populations of people simultaneously. And, older adults have so much wisdom and to share with young adults. And young adults have, so much to share with older adults. They've got the energy and they're wanting to learn. They're wanting to have a mentor in their lives that are perhaps outside of their family circle. And when we bring these two generations together, whether it be for a day program that we run or whether it's a multi-week program, in both of those situations, we really see the bonding taking place and the companionship and the friendship. And we find that people intergenerationally really are able to share with one another and really be their authentic selves. And that's something that Gary and I hold very dear. And it's something, it is the basis of For All Ages work. And it's something that we hope that we will be able to continue to expand as we grow.
And there's information on our website on how you can participate in programs like Tea at 3 at ctpublic.org/where we live. Connie Malone in Canton and Siri Palreddy at Amherst College, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Kat.
Yeah.
And we'll be continuing this conversation with Deb Bibbins and Gary Sekorski after a quick break. A question for you, though. How do loneliness, isolation, or social disconnection affect you? Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, approximately half of U.S. adults reported experiencing loneliness. The issue moved U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy to issue an advisory around the loneliness epidemic here in America. And back with us to help us better understand the loneliness epidemic is Deb Bibbins and Gary Sekorski, who are co-founders of For All Ages and the Connecticut Collaborative to End Loneliness. And also for our listeners, remember that you can also join the conversation and share your experience. Leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Gary, I want to start with you here. We've talked about a couple of demographics and ages that are uniquely affected by this epidemic, but men are also experiencing this in very unique ways. Can you help us walk through that?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I first really wanted to just make a quick comment about what was mentioned before with Connie and Deb.
Sure, go for it.
Is that, part of this advisory, this national advisory, is directed at all the states. Right. And because the Connecticut Collaborative, convening by us For All Ages, this is addressing those exact issues. Connie mentioned transportation as a big one. And I guess just as an overall statement, I wanted to make sure that people understand that the purpose of the collaborative is to address these very issues. Transportation is a huge thing, and you can't address that without funding. So that's one of the facets that I just wanted to point out, because how do you solve this problem, right? How do you solve the connection problem, the loneliness problem? Well, you have to get the right people in the right room, and that's what the collaborative is all about. And I just wanted to kind of start with that, and then I'll answer your question about how does men play into this. And I thought I'd share some information about loneliness and social isolation, just with some perspectives and some human, I'll say, social observations. As Deb and all of us have been saying this morning, loneliness can affect anybody for age, race, nationality, religion, socioeconomic status, and even gender. Based on Cigna's first survey, there really wasn't much result difference between male and female loneliness score. And that's based on a UCLA loneliness scale. But in 2020, when they re-released new findings, men, in fact, were more lonely than women. So what does that mean? Well, to kind of understand that, there's probably several reasons, some of which are cultural, right? Historically, if you envision, let's say, the mid 20th century, right, you had that classic scenario where, the mother stayed home and the husband went off to work, and the mom ran the household. She was in charge of the neighborhood, the social connections, the cooking, their trips to the store, churches, social gatherings. So that's a cultural phenomenon. So another thing would be, how is living habits changed? So I came across this statistic that I thought I would share from the Surgeon General's report. In 1960, single-person households made up 13% of all the country's households. Something you might expect. But in 2022, that number more than doubled to 29%. So just by definition, that puts you in a position where you certainly could be more lonely just by being by yourself. And that is not unique to females or males.
Right.
But I'll also say that, back to what Deb was talking about with stigma, certainly around admitting or declaring that a male is lonely, the stereotypes around males, being macho or don't want to be vulnerable, that can certainly cause a part of that problem with male loneliness. One of the ways For All Ages, Deb and myself address it is, well, it's quite simple. I'm an adult male myself, and I easily connect with the male generations as we're doing programs and events. And what does that do? Well, it fosters connection, it builds trust, and ultimately understanding, so we create better social health. I hope that helps answer the question, Kat.
No, absolutely. We want you to share your experience and really quickly here too. And I want to play a clip from Dr. Soumya Kurtakoti, who's the chief of geriatric medicine at Hartford Hospital, who spoke about how she addresses men she feels may be less open to talking about loneliness or even depression. Let's take a quick listen here.
I think women are just a little bit more open to answering questions. I think we see that with depression and anxiety too, right? So I think there are other signs that sometimes you can look up, like especially for depression. When I'm talking to a men with depression, rather than asking, are you depressed, I might ask more, so are you more irritable or frustrated? Right. So there's different ways that you're actually talking or trying to elicit some of the information. So when it comes to loneliness, right, rather than saying, okay, are you by yourself or are you lonely? It's like, what other activities are you involved in, right? How do you keep yourself busy? What does your day-to-day life look like? So I think it's different ways of probing these questions to have them discuss it a little bit more rather than being direct and asking.
So Gary, we'd love your response here to Dr. Kurtakoti's approach, asking if you're keeping yourself busy versus, are you by yourself?
Sure. I think that's spot on. My gut always tells me that's very true. And back to what I was saying about cultural differences, this is how we've grown up. It doesn't surprise me that males may be a little hesitant to declaring or admitting their troubles with loneliness and feeling less connected. No one in the room, we often say something like this, no one in the room ever raises their hand and says, "Hey, I'm lonely," right? That's something that's very private. But I think the good news here is that maybe a little shred of goodness that came out of the COVID pandemic is maybe people are talking about it more. And ultimately, that's what we need to do. I mean, I think that's what's spawning all this effort from across the board nationally and in the state and even at this very program. So I think we're all on our way. So I'm thrilled to hear those comments, and hopefully we can help everybody here.
Absolutely. And here,
Can I jump in?
We actually want to do a quick clip, so afterwards we
Okay.
can get back to you. Thank you very much for that. I do want to play a clip from Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy, both on the links between political extremism and loneliness, and also to how men are uniquely affected.
We've all been lonely, and when you're lonely, there's a lot of emotions that come over you. Probably the first is sadness, but one of them is anger, right? One of the things that you often feel when you're lonely is angry, and you want to know why you're angry, and you're more willing to listen to arguments about the reasons why your life isn't the way that you had hoped, and those scapegoats get sort of dialed up very easily for you by sort of demagogues and political fringe movements. And so, yes, I think there's a correlation between more fringy political movements in this country, more violent threats to democracy, and more people, in particular men, who I think are going through a whole set of other very radical transitions at the same time, who are feeling pretty alone.
Gary, I want to get back to you really quickly first on this. How does this reinforce what you're seeing?
Well, I think it's spot on. If you look at everything that's gone on in a lot of different avenues and perspectives today, anger is a big one, right? If you don't feel comfortable, if you don't feel connected, if you don't feel as though your voice is heard for any number of reasons, lonely being a huge one, that leads to discourse, and it leads to unhappiness and a poor quality of living. So I think we're all kind of saying the same things here. The key is that we have to try to fix it. And I think the real positive note to all this is that we can fix it. We just have to connect, and we have to talk. And I think together, when you connect, a lot of these ills go away, and that ultimately heads for the solution to the problem.
And this is certainly an issue that we'll be covering again soon here on Where We Live. I want to read a quick statement from organizer Liz Stern, who messaged us on Facebook discussing how acutely nursing homes are affected by the epidemic. A 2021 law in Connecticut requires 2 essential support persons at all times, even in a public health emergency. Liz says Senator Blumenthal is in the process of introducing an analogous federal bill at this time. Thank you so much, Liz, for sharing that information with us. And Deb, real quickly, I know you had a comment earlier, but also have a question for you. We heard from Dr. Kudakoti, who also talked about how our over-reliance on phones and sort of scrolling can really deepen this sense of fierce independence and perhaps even create a kind of distraction from real feelings of loneliness. Is that something that you would agree with?
I absolutely agree. Thanks, Kat. Social media, for all of its positive, all of its positivity, has also caused some really big problems, especially for the young adult population who spend hours a day just scrolling and seeing what they believe is their friends' better lives, and it leads to depression, and it's causing a real big problem. When we take a look at, for instance, the 2021 Connecticut School Health Survey, the percentage of high school students who were reporting that their mental health is most of the time not good is nearly 30%. And I believe a lot of that has to do with social media and the amount of time that youth and young adults are spending scrolling, as you say. Certainly older people do it too. And I think that, if people take a step back, and maybe what we'll find 5 to 10 years from now by researchers is that as social media has become more prominent in our lives over the past couple of decades, loneliness has also increased. And I think there's a direct causal correlation between the two. And I believe it's one of the things that Senator Murphy is focused on federally, is a bill to put some guardrails in place for social media for youth and young adults.
And really quickly, got about 30 seconds left, but we have Amber on Twitter who asked us, how do you think messaging that causes people to fear strangers and people with different backgrounds, and how that may play into disconnection and loneliness? You got 30 seconds.
I really believe that, as Gary was mentioning, we need to see each other as humans, and that is the basis of who we are. We are all humans. We all need social connection. We all need social health in our lives in order to be mentally and physically healthy. And I think we really need to start to come together. And I think once we can do that, we're going to see an improvement overall in our health.
That was beautiful. You've been listening to Deb Bibbins and Gary Sekorski. They're co-founders of For All Ages and the Connecticut Collaborative to End Loneliness. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having us on, Kat.
Thanks for having us.
And a reminder to our listeners, you can meet me and several other Connecticut public talk show hosts at Aquila's Nest Vineyards in Newtown on Wednesday, September 20th from 6 to 8. Come and share what's happening around where you live and what topics you think we should tackle. Visit ctpublic.org/vineyard to purchase tickets, and we would love to see you there. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Katie Pellico. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app, and thank you all very much for listening.